So how does porn tempt us differently at different ages of our life? Does the nature of my porn struggles stay the same, or do they morph over time and change through different seasons of my life? Today on Pastors on Porn, we look at that question, something I've never really heard discussed in all the recovery material I have read. So stay tuned. Now today, before we unpackage that topic, the title of this podcast is called Porn Through the Ages. I want to make an important announcement regarding the future of this podcast. I love the podcast and the material that it represents. If you can't tell, it's one of my passions. I've also been spending some time with Matt Dobschutz from Porn Free Radio. He's one of my recovery heroes, and we've been talking through about the best way to approach helping people. And he's helped me rethink my approach in some different areas. And so out of his discussions and some of my own work, I've had a bit of a rethink, and this is where I've landed. I'm going to continue this podcast, but it will be specifically tailored to topics that affect those in church leadership. Those in church leaders who are also struggling with addictive behaviors like porn. I've also realized that many of the topics that I've done, and I know it's over 2,000 downloads now, many of these topics don't just apply to pastors. That they could be helpful for anybody. And that's where the problem of the name is. The name is limiting. Someone may look at the title, Pastors on Porn, and they go, hey, I'm not a pastor, so I guess it doesn't apply to me. So they just skip it. So here's the plan. I am going to create a second podcast, which is for more general material that applies to everybody. Yes, that could include pastors, but it's not specifically tailored to them. The name of the podcast is, wait for it, Finding Traction. The byline will be something like helping you find recovery, helping you find momentum in your recovery from porn and other compulsive behaviors. Got to work on that. Let's try that again. Helping you find momentum in your recovery from porn and other compulsive behaviors. So if you're looking for it and you see the picture of a studded snow tire, you found it. I don't know if there's other podcasts of that same name. On that podcast, I'm also going to preview some of the life hacks from the 52 lessons in the course that I've done, Finding Traction. I'm also going to do some of those, or most of those, on YouTube. So they're going to be on YouTube and on the podcast. So yes, I have my work cut out for me. So towards that end, let's roll up our sleeves. Today's podcast, I am going to do part 1 of this topic, Porn Through the Ages. Now, to get to part 2, you will need to search for and find my new podcast called Finding Traction. Yes, it's a shameless hook or a plug or a tease, but I really don't think you'll be disappointed. So, let's go back to the question. How does porn tempt us at different times in our life? Does the nature of our porn struggles stay the same, or do they morph over time? I've just been intrigued by this question recently. I, for example, was hit hard by the midlife stage in my life. It felt like gasoline being poured on my struggle with porn. I mean, literally, it almost took me out. Now, my dad was even crazier. He went from this super hardworking, farmer, conservative type guy to, get it, long-haired, hippie musician that wore blue jeans and began a string of affairs on my mom as he went around playing country and western music. Talk about life transitions. Now I'm approaching 60. My wife told me the other day that she has to be careful in going to teach because she has an elderly person at home. So I don't, the things she says to me. But I'm approaching 60 this fall, the fall of 2020. And I am speeding towards another major transition in my life. I'm going to be continuing as a teaching pastor, but I'm going to be passing over the reins of the lead pastor role to a young couple in our church. I'll still be there, still be involved, but they will be in the lead role and taking over from me. But I want to do this stage better than I did the previous stage. And it got me thinking, well, how do I do that? How do I not crash into a wall? Apparently, I'm not the only one who struggled with this. I recently listened to an interview with Gordon MacDonald. He's this wise old 80-something-year-old life traveler, former pastor and mentor. And he wrote a book. He wrote lots of books, but one of his books was called Rebuilding Your Broken World. That's quite well known. He was even asked back in the day to come in by, I'm not sure if Bill Clinton asked him, I think he did, or somebody around him to help Bill build his rebroken world. Not sure if it worked or not, but he's just that kind of guy. And Gordon MacDonald says he thinks that most men hit different crises in their life. At 38, somewhere around 38, around 48, and around 62. Now, okay, I'm sure I got some of your attentions at that. So the first one, at 38 or anywhere your late 30s, early 40s, he calls this what would often be seen as a midlife crisis, the crisis where I'm exhausted. I've been running so hard for so long, but I'm not nearly where I thought I would be. I'm out of ideas. I'm out of energy. I'm unhappy with looking back at the success in my life. I'm unhappy perhaps with my job or with my marriage. It just doesn't feel like it's working anymore. And I think it'd be safe. He called this something akin to a crisis of energy or confidence. I felt like a horrible loser during that stage of my life. So that would be the first crises of many men's life. Again, this exact year, somewhere 38 to 43, but we'll just call that crises number one that many people appear to have. Crises number two is around 48. And the 48 or somewhere in that, late 40s, early 50s, they're saying, I feel like life is passing me by. They're going for younger men and women. More and more people are rolling their eyes when I talk. I can't seem to keep up with all the changes that are happening, and what I seem to think and say doesn't seem to resonate like it used to. People see me differently, and he calls that a crisis of relevance. Now, around 62, let's say, and he said 62, but again, it could be anywhere late 50s going into your 60s. He says many of those people hit a crisis where they feel like they're just trying to hold on. They're in one sense just showing up, but they're struggling now with feelings of anxiousness and fear. How am I going to support myself through retirement and old age? What about my health? What if I get sick? All of the uncertainties are coupled with your lack of now personal energy and time left. And he talks about that as being something around the crisis around fear and anxiety. Now, you go, man, this is really depressing, Vern. I'm not sure I want part two. But, just stick with me here. As I think about it, I guess maybe the reasons why those transitions become crises is because we are unknowingly leaving one stage and we're entering a new stage, but we don't have any guiding roadmap for what it's going to look and feel like. I read a couple days ago a great verse in the Bible that provides a great placemat for this whole discussion. Listen to the way Eugene Peterson phrases Psalm 139:16. All the stages of my life were spread out before you. The days of my life all prepared before I even lived one day. All the stages of my life. It talks about life being a succession of stages. Now we can take that same idea and apply it to our addictive struggles. Because I really think how not just what we experience, but how we experience it, especially with addictive struggles like porn, they change over the years. Looking at the overall picture of my life, I have been dealing with porn struggles for 5 decades of my life. As a teenager, in my 20s, in my 30s, in my 40s, and in my 50s. And yet I've noticed that porn presents itself to me, offers itself to me, tempts me in different ways over those decades. You go, say what? It's true. And to open up this whole idea, I want to talk about, first of all, let's go back over to life stages. And I've heard someone say, we basically seem to enter in a new life stage every 10 years. So we're going to go with that as just a simple, it's a generalization, but just a simple rule of thumb. And we're going to talk about general life stages, and then we're going to overlay it in part 2 with the whole journey of recovery. So let's go through these stages, and then we'll really begin to dive into recovery in particular. I think porn plays itself out depending on what stage we're in. So let's just start with the teenage stage. Most of us have been through that. Thank goodness we're through it. But really, at a teenage stage, most of us are struggling around questions of individuation. Who am I as opposed to my parents? We start switching, first of all, maybe with 13, 14, 15, we try by switching that identity over to friends. So we get our identity from our friends. But if we're healthy over time, as we head towards our 20s, we begin to define that on more individual terms. Now, if we navigate through this successfully, we move to the next stage with some degree of confidence. If not, we're reacting and rebelling to everything and everyone, whether it's our parents or any or authority figures who we feel are trying to tell us what to do. But let's just move out of our teens, some of you say thank goodness, into our 20s. In our 20s, this is where we're figuring out the biggest questions and directions of our life. What will I do with my life? And who will I do it with? Having said this, we do recognize that many are waiting until their 30s to get married. But let's just kind of scope that back into the 20s and say that's part of what we're wrestling with in our 20s. Struggles could look as simple as perhaps us not wanting to move out of a teenager type lifestyle. And maybe because we think, economic realities are such that we'll never have the experience or the ability to live like our parents did. But success in moving through our 20s usually involves some degree of us willing to leverage our gifts and education with a certain degree of confidence. We find ourselves willing to accept responsibilities, and we begin to move towards some type of constructing a life, and that's with or without a life partner. So those are some of the questions in our 20s. Now, in our 30s are often consumed with trying to make something of our lives. Oftentimes, our ambition is at its highest level, and I know as guys, we often find ourselves consciously or subconsciously measuring ourselves against other people. It could be others in our profession, other pastors. It could be others in your family. It could be friends that you graduated from high school with. Don't get me wrong. That's not necessarily a bad thing per se. Especially if wanting to be successful is a part of you wanting to make a difference in the world around you. Whether it's ambition or selfish ambition, or most of us have mixed motives at the best of time. You know what? That's just something that most of us are running hard at that stage in our lives. Now, it's interesting in your 30s, many men, for the very first time, are starting to have emerging issues and wounds from their childhood. It's like they went underground in their 20s. It's like they didn't exist. But in your 30s, you find some of those issues, some of those wounds beginning to emerge. They have a way of forcing themselves to the surface, and this often breaks out as we head towards the pivotal 40s. Now, in our 40s, they often can feel more like our 30s, but there's more responsibility, there's more bills, and there's less time. The magic of having younger children in our 30s often settles into the contested reality of raising teenagers in our 40s. Our bills are at a peak, especially the grocery bill. Being successful doesn't make it easier. It just means that we have more balls to juggle. If we're still in our marriages, and hopefully we are, not all of us are at that stage in our 40s, but if we are, we find perhaps the greatest struggle is to not drift apart from our partner. If we're not in our marriage, we're left with the added challenge, and many of my friends are in this situation where they have the extra financial obligations of being separated or divorced without the benefits of family connections. So that is kind of roughly how the 40s can look. Now the 50s. The 50s are where we're firmly now in midlife and facing empty nest. That's where we're at, although my son has just moved back because of the virus, but for a number of years we were in the empty nest. At this point, the state of our marriage is either settling into a vibrancy and a deep friendships, or it's become stale. We've probably advanced as far as we're going to go to in our careers, and perhaps we're trying to juggle the costs of putting away money for the future and our kids' educational needs, for example. At this point, most of us are also dealing with elderly parents and the struggles that presents. We are starting to maybe have the first tremors of health problems, and vibrancy and energy are no longer there like it used to be. Again, you're going, this does not sound good, Vern, but I'm just saying it like it is. I'm 59, so I'm just talking about some of this area. Now let's move into our 60s. Like I say, I will be moving into that this fall. In our 60s, most of us are attempting to slow down. We're either entering or trying to enter into retirement and buying sweater vests, practicing our pickleball and shuffleboard moves. No, not really. Hopefully not. But, maybe some of us can't retire because of the stock market crash or any number of other possibilities. We may find ourselves facing resentment that we're not in a place where we wanted to be. If we do retire, we now find ourselves with the challenge as a man that most of our male identity was based around what we do. And that scaffolding is no longer there to undergird us. At this point, health problems have become a more of a pressing issue, whether it's our prostate or our hips or our knees or any number of other things we just took for granted before. If we've let our physical health slide, our 60s is where we begin to pay for it. Okay, let's throw the last two in, the 70s and 80s, which is all about, and Gordon MacDonald talks about this, facing loss of our health, the loss of facing losing same-age friends. We may find ourselves in family networks, or we may find ourselves disconnected. Even support systems such as faith communities, they may no longer seem as interested in speaking to our concerns and needs. But if we remain positive, we find ways to enjoy, cheer on, and encourage others who are younger. Now, as I've walked through that, some of you go, that is the most depressing journey through life that I've ever heard presented. Okay, now I am going to present to you, I'm going to take that layer, I am now going to overlay it with the addictive battles in our life and the struggle specifically with sexual addictions and porn. That is the next step we're going to do. But to get the second step, to get that new step, you now need to leave this podcast and you need to find the Finding Traction podcast. And we are going to now explain and walk through the different things that porn offers at every stage of your life and how to combat it and beat it in your life. So God bless you. We'll see you over on the new podcast called Finding Traction.